Hi.
Hello. We're in the Greatness of the Good News chapter 15 of In Search of Christian Freedom by Ray Franz. His new subhead is How Effective a Witness? That is, how effective a witness are the Jehovah's Witnesses really giving? And he cites first the text from 1 Corinthians 14 verses 8 and 9. The New International Version says, "If the trumpet does not sound a clear call, who will get ready for battle? So it is with you. Unless you speak intelligible words with your tongue, how will anyone know what you are saying? You will be just speaking into the air." And Ray comments, aside from the quantity and extensiveness of this witnessing activity, what of its quality? Mere figures on a chart do not reveal this.
Even on the surface, one can see obvious problems. That by far the majority of what is called declaring the good news is simply a presentation and distribution of books and magazines, the vast majority of which admittedly are never read. During my 50 years of active service, I accompanied thousands of individual fellow witnesses in many countries as they went from door to door. Only rarely did I feel that what they said to people could qualify as anything approaching an effective witness for Christianity. The claim is that by such activity, the division of people into classes of sheep and goats is being effected under angelic direction, with a life or death outcome in the balance. I cannot believe that a just God would ever judge any human's worthiness for salvation on the basis of his or her acceptance or non-acceptance of the door-to-door presentations I have heard, or, for that matter, those I myself made in conforming to the organization's field service instructions. The overall mental impression left with most listeners is unquestionably that of persons interested in selling religious literature or in advocating their particular sectarian beliefs.
Equally significant is the general lack of serious concern to extend further aid to those visited, an attitude that has been endemic in the organization from as far back as I can remember. This is certainly not true of all witnesses, but from a lifetime of association, I can add my testimony to that of others already quoted, that those of whom it is not are the exception rather than the rule. A predominant sense of satisfaction is manifest among most witnesses once the duty of having spent an hour or more in some door-to-door witnessing is done. They have put in their time, and that is evidently their major preoccupation. The great majority of those who accept literature are not revisited. While an enormous quantity of literature is distributed, the effectiveness of this mammoth distribution is remarkably limited. And in that he has a footnote, in which he says additional evidence for this ineffectiveness is undoubtedly seen in the remarkably great amount of time spent worldwide each year in comparison with the number of persons being baptized. During the 10 years, 1981 to 1990, it took an average of 3,003 hours of field service for every single person brought to the point of baptism. That is equivalent to a person spending 8 hours a day for 375 days in order to find and bring one person to baptism. The current average is more than double the average during the 1950s, then averaging 1,283 hours of field service per person baptized.
Mm. And now it's up to 10,000 hours, I think.
According to JW Facts, the figures are more like 10,000 hours per baptized disciple nowadays.
And that's quite a contrast to the work of the Holy Spirit in the Bible, where you've got Peter giving a message, which, maybe an hour, and he gets 3,000 disciples one day.
3,000 disciples for 1 hour?
Yeah, well, I guess we could estimate.
That's the work of the Holy Spirit. Now, angelic guidance, that's the key phrase that jumps out at me here. Angelic direction. We don't really think we're doing the work the angels are selecting. They seem to be highly inefficient too then, don't they?
Yeah. Okay. One longtime elder, responding to an organizational request for comments in the late 1970s, wrote to the headquarters, quote, "We have blanketed the United States of America with our literature, and to a lesser degree the rest of the world. When we honestly ask ourselves what proportion of the millions of books and magazines and booklets that we have published are ever read by the people, it would probably be alarming to us as to the few that have been. Even among our brothers, if we honestly look at the facts, probably less than half of the literature that comes into the homes of a dedicated family is ever read by most of the brothers." End of quote.
This is a memorandum from Dallas Wallace, who was a prominent elder, still was when Ray wrote this book. A leading figure in the acquisition of property by the organization. And now he has a quote from Charles Liebensperger, who is a former headquarters staff member and also still a prominent elder back in 1991 when the book came out. And that quote is this: "As discussed previously, our literature is not being read by the publishers or the public. About 1/3 of the publishers read the literature, far less of the public. In fact, I have had several elders tell me they feel guilty placing the 384-page and 416-page books with the public because they felt the books were a drudgery. When we studied them on Tuesday nights, they would not read them a second time themselves, and they wonder how the public could ever have an appetite for them if it affected them that way." End of quote.
Wow. A very large part of the witness that is given, then, in effect, goes into the air, with no genuine telling effect. It is as if the distribution of hundreds of millions of publications of itself supplies an organizational sense of accomplishment, with no real concern that the vast majority remains unread. Alternate methods, or more effective methods of helping people than by door-to-door distribution of books and magazines, are not explored, actually not even contemplated. A huge publishing system has been erected, and it is steadily producing a great flood of literature that demands an outlet. The need to distribute takes precedence over other, more vital needs. In the past, the organization's monthly field service paper, Our Kingdom Ministry, has at times promoted giving greater stress to the Bible itself in the house-to-house activity. But invariably, after a few months, articles appear reminding the witnesses to keep on in offering the books and magazines, and a return to the usual pattern of principal emphasis on literature placement takes place.
By the way, if you hear noises in the background, that's not your technology. That's our neighbor moving around in the driveway.
Yeah.
There's another footnote here about the inventory situation that caused the witnesses to, well, have to move the books.
Yeah.
And Ray says, on occasion when there has been a large inventory backlog of a certain publication, though that book had earlier been studied by all the congregations at the congregational book study groups, the headquarters has rescheduled that publication for use, knowing that the number of new persons that had begun associating in the interim would take much of it, if not all, the inventory backlog. The need to clean out that backlog determined how hundreds of thousands of persons would spend numerous hours of study. What their spiritual needs actually indicated as appropriate was not the determining factor. Ray goes on, the good news about God's Son is called the glorious good news. That is 2 Corinthians 4 verse 4. To restrict its being made known to, or to equate its proclamation essentially with, the distribution of denominational literature of any religious system is to reduce immeasurably its grandeur, to trivialize and cheapen it rather than to magnify it. In discounting all that has been done by any other religious group in previous times, the Watchtower of May 1, 1981, page 17, states, quote, Let the honest-hearted person compare the kind of preaching of the gospel of the kingdom done by the religious systems of Christendom during all the centuries with that done by Jehovah's Witnesses since the end of World War I in 1918. They are not one and the same kind. That of Jehovah's Witnesses is really gospel, or good news, as of God's heavenly kingdom that was established by the enthronement of his Son, Jesus Christ, at the end of the Gentile times in 1914. End of quote. Ray says, as it itself acknowledges, the Watchtower organization has its own special kind of good news, tied in inextricably with a certain date. This, however, raises the following question. And that's his next subhead: the original good news or an altered version?
Mm-hmm. I was thinking during the last part of my being a witness, when I'd already stopped talking at the door, because, well, during the very last part, I was only using my Bible, because I was already distrusting the Watchtower literature. But after a while, I just didn't say anything, because I knew I didn't really know what I was talking about. But you did get a sense of accomplishment just giving out literature.
Yep. Even taking it to laundromats.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
3 people, 4 people in a car distributing old Awakes and magazines, Awakes and Watchtowers at laundromats.
Yeah. On rainy days, that's what we did, yeah.
So we're going to link Peter's Pentecost message and its results. When the Holy Spirit is at work, what happens? So we'll put that discussion of Peter's Pentecost message and also 7 marks of the true Christian congregation. It follows up on Peter's message, because if you don't get this one right, the Acts 2 model of the church and the congregation, what it should look like, what its emphasis should be, well, you'll end up in a very bad religious situation. So the next time, the question, is the Watchtower's good news the original good news or an altered version?